Latoya, we had 2 people sign up to do a reporting for us. I don't know if they're here. Did you record who they were?
Yes, we do. I think Akisha. I can recall Akisha. Akisha, are you ready?
Akisha Rogers?
Fergus.
And who was the other one?
Yes, I am here.
So thank you first of all for agreeing to do that. And what we're asking is just 2 or 3 things that you remember from the training, just to get us back to set up for it. And then I will do a little bit of after you're done, we'll do a few minutes of the food safety Jeopardy based on the 2 hours we had, just to get us started and get us warmed up, and also give people time to catch up. Okay, Lakeisha, thank you.
Okay, one of the things I remember was, and it was basically coming up throughout the entire session about washing the chicken, how it is very important not to wash chicken, how the bacteria, Salmonella, I think that's the name, can spread, especially when you are doing it in the zinc, because it can splash on certain things in the kitchen. So it's not best to wash your chicken, and if you do, have a specific bucket in a certain area, and whenever you're finished, you clean down the place. It is. Oh boy.
We have a junior farmer.
Yes. Another thing was we talked about a disease that infants can have, or toddlers. I think it's called, begins with a B. I really cannot remember right now.
Infant botulism.
Yes, and oh boy.
Forget about it. I'll give you a keyword to remember. Think about Botox, and that's botulism.
Yes, thank you for helping me. And another one, because you said 3, was I can't remember, because right now I'm literally washing my child's skin, so I really can't remember. I'm trying to make
that's okay. Well, we appreciate you doing that. I know, so thank you first of all for taking the time and the lead. I don't think we've all told you. I think you volunteered, so appreciate that a lot. And yes, you are right. The one about chicken that we said we are now recommending to wash your raw chicken before you cook it because of the potential spread of germs. The one correction is it's salmonella is in it, the primary microorganism that's associated with the chicken. It's called Campylobacter, and a short word for it, Campy. So if you think about going camping, Campylobacter. It's very much like salmonella, but it's the #1 organism in raw chicken and turkey. And then you talk about the infant botulism. And the reason why infant botulism is a problem in infants is they can eat the Clostridium botulism spore. And I think we talked about the cells can be cells, or you can have spores. And the spores are like the seeds, if you want to think about spores, like seeds, that they stay dormant, and then when activated, they can grow and produce toxin. And in honey, we have, because botulism is found everywhere in the soil. It's not uncommon, it's ubiquitous in nature. And so we find it in honey, raw honey, that's not processed. And kids under 1 year old do not have the enzyme required to break down the botulism. So they're not getting food poisoning, they're actually ingesting the spores in the honey, and that's causing them to get infant botulism. And it causes the same symptoms, paralysis, stiffness, dizziness in the babies. So that's good. Thank you, Keisha.
Yes, and sorry, I also remembered one more thing is the visible physical hazards in foods, which are like
Yes.
nails, strings,
Yep.
stones, seeds here. Yeah, those kind of bad stuff.
Yes. So the physical hazard, that's fantastic. Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Latoya, who was the other one? Oh, I think I may have.
Oh, I'm here. I'm here. Sorry.
Okay.
The second volunteer from last week, please, for some reason, I only have one name recorded. Can you please identify yourself to give us the summary of what you recall from the last presentation?
So
I'm
one
still-
second, it looks like we're having a technical difficulty. Two people said in the chat they couldn't hear. Bronte or Bronte, I think Bronte Tucker was not hearing. Are you back? And can you hear? You can either put a thumbs up. And then Lakeisha Rogers also said she couldn't hear. Is there any other person that can't hear? Okay, we're not seeing anything, so I'm assuming everybody can hear now. All right, well, let's go on and see who the next volunteer was to help us out. Okay, Lakeisha give us a thumbs up. Great, thank you. So who was the second volunteer? None of us wrote that name down. So if you did volunteer and you were there, could you speak up? If not, if there's somebody else who would like to chime in, that would be good too. Anybody? Do I have to pick somebody? What about you, Cynthia Brazier? Cynthia? Can you tell us a few things about what we learned on Tuesday? Or was it last week? Sorry. Cynthia, if you are saying something, are you on?
Hello,
mute?
can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I guess food temperatures, raw eggs, undercooked meat, certain foods, the cold temperature has to be a certain degree. Hot foods, hot temperature has to be a certain degree. Raw
Yeah.
eggs are also not good. Undercooked meats, especially chicken, is definitely not good.
Good. Thank you, Cynthia.
You're welcome.
All right, so I won't torture you guys anymore, but what we will do is do a summary in the version of the WhatsApp. So basically it's gonna summarize some of the questions, and the food safety jeopardy is somebody, and I know you guys are not gonna let me hang, you guys gonna participate because I know you guys are a very active group. And what you're going to do is you're gonna pick a dollar value when Latoya brings up the screen, and then you will get a statement, and then you have to answer the statement in a form of a question. We could do another practice again. Latoya, if you pick 100 on practice, and it says Pitlin Carew, that's the statement, your answer would be, you go to the bar. Who is the executive director and founder of HD? So you get a statement, and then you have to answer in a form of a question. Okay? So we'll spend a few minutes, that's just another way of summarizing what we learned. Again, as we grow up, we know that remembering things is repetition. So let's try that again. So anybody, and the person who picked can answer, or anybody else can put your hands up or answer if that person who picked doesn't have the answer. Who wants to pick a number? And one more thing, the lower numbers, of course, are supposedly easier. And then the higher numbers are a little bit more challenging, but it's nothing that complicated. It's a lot of what we learned last week. Okay, so who's my first person? Nilissa has her hands up. What do you want, Nilissa?
Kitchen prep 300.
Yeah, 40 degrees F to 140 degrees F, danger zone. So what do you think the question is?
What is the temperature range at which bacteria grow and multiply?
Woohoo, look at you, you can teach that class. Yes, very good. Very, very good. What is the temperature range for rapid growth of bacteria? So remember we said we won't defrost foods and other meats at room temperature because of that reason. The bacteria can grow and multiply really, really fast and cause foodborne illness. Thank you, Melissa. See guys, it's not that bad. Let's do 3 more people and then we'll go on to the program. Anybody? There's no wrong answer. So it's just, and I know you guys are not shy. And I know you guys don't want me to feel bad, so you will feel sorry for me and pick one. I'm not. Anybody? Was hearing a while ago, but I'm not hearing again. From Boniti Choka is having problems hearing. Khadija, you want to go?
I think I was on mute by mistake. No, I don't want to go.
Well, let's pick one. And we'll help you, we all answer it. Pick a category since you're already here.
Hygiene 400. Damn, why
Hygiene
did
for 400. Cannot be seen with the naked eyes.
Bacteria?
In a question format?
What is bacteria?
What is bacteria? See, and what are germs or microorganisms? Same thing, bacteria, but what are germs or microorganisms? And I put germs or microorganisms because bacteria and viruses also fall into that same category. So it's microorganisms and germs. So bacteria is correct as well, but I made it broader. Thank you. Let's go, you guys are warming up. Come on.
Miscellaneous 100.
Miscellaneous 100, thank you. School uniforms, fishing, carnival, beaches. Any guess?
What is culture?
What is culture? What are examples of, and you can open the question, the answer. What are examples of SKN culture? Very good, thanks. Last one, let's go guys. Let's hit it with a big bang. See, it's not that scary.
Let's do miscellaneous 500.
There we go, 500. Biological, chemical, physical.
What are food safety hazards?
Yes. Ding, 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 ding. Very good. What are food safety hazards? Thank you, everyone who turned over a tile and played Jeopardy for us. Again, that questions will be available for you to go back in your free time and take a look at them. You can also feel free if you want, if you have a class or if you have kids you want to teach, you can feel free to use that tool as a way of summarizing learnings. It's hard to do it when you're doing it virtual, so we try to figure out different ways of getting it. I have a few more for the upcoming training that we will do. So thank you everyone for helping there. You guys have your journals, right? Does everybody have their journal? If you don't have it, just put your hands up and we'll resend it. I think everybody got their journal, their learning journal. So I hope you guys had a chance to take a look at it. I know some of you have backyard gardens, some of you have farms, but basically no matter what you have, you can use it. We're gonna use it towards the end of the training, and we're gonna try to populate some of the information so you can have a food safety plan. So if you have a farm, a food safety plan becomes really critical, especially for your customers and for you to ensure that you are monitoring food safety and you are creating a culture of food safety. Beryl had her hands raised. Beryl, yes? Beryl, did you want to say, Beryl Sitten? I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Beryl, B-E-R-Y-L. Okay. If you are saying something, you are muted.
I think she's saying she doesn't have her journal.
Oh, you don't have your journal. Latoya, how do people get a copy of, how is it sent? I think everybody got sent. The learning journal was part of your registration, and in there you have your food safety plan. You should have been using it for the prior 2 courses. Did you guys not use it in your prior 2 sessions? Latoya, do you know if everybody got the journal?
Everybody should have received one.
How would they
But
get?
if they don't have it, I can arrange to get it to them. So in the chat, please, for those who don't have it, just let me know and I'll arrange for you to get one, please.
Okay. So the journal is meant to be used throughout that whole session. It gives you a learning log and it gives you some training. You're gonna get it also for the financial literacy. I find it to be very useful as a way of documenting, and also it gives you a heads up so you can plan ahead and take the learnings that you have and make it applicable for your farm or your agro-processing plants. Okay? Okay, so without further ado, we can continue, Latoya. Oh, before I go, is there any question from the last meeting that anybody have? Any questions before we start into that new session? No? And again, I'm gonna go through the information. I know it's really difficult to listen into presentations if you're not seeing the person and it's just another presentation. We try to make it interactive as much as possible. So feel free to raise your hands, use the feature that we have in the system, and then we can answer at the end, or if I see it, I can try to stop and answer it at that same time. As much interaction as we have, I really need you to help me feel and get the energy. You guys don't want me to fall asleep on you, do you? So I need your help to continue. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn off my video so I can focus on the presentation, and I'll come back, turn it back on, okay? Yes, so okay, guys, so for today's session, we'll do agricultural practices. Good agricultural practices. I forgot the good on this one. And then we'll do the farm food safety plan. I was gonna talk about organic farming. And if we do have time, we will bring it up, but mostly for today, we will stay agricultural practicing. And then next session, which is Thursday, we will cover organic practices, certification, and we'll also do a piece on agro processing, which I normally don't do, but based on the demographics, I see there's a number of people who's in agro processing, so we'll touch on that a little bit. So it looks like, Toya, like there's a number of people that don't have their journal. So Latoya will get you your journals at some point.
Yes, I'm gonna share it in the WhatsApp chat, and if you would like it to be shared via email, I'll do that also.
All right, thank you. All right, so we'll talk about that next slide. We did the Jeopardy part, so we can skip that. So before we start, by either a 1, 2, or 3, I want you to indicate in the chat, 1 meaning I know a lot about good agricultural practicing, 2, I know a little bit, and 3, this is my first exposure. So if you guys would indicate that in the chat room, so I could get an idea of where everybody is. So we have a number 3, we have a few threes. Two, 3, 2. Okay, I'm getting the sense. So we'll be okay then. Is there anybody who's a 1? 1 meaning I know everything there is, so you can be my co-pilot. Okay. All right, well, thank you for, I do not have a journal, okay. So guys, we will go through and do good agricultural practices, and we'll do an introduction to good agricultural practices, and sometimes you'll see me go back and forth between GAP and good agricultural practices, the same thing. We'll talk about the benefits and we'll talk about the principles. Right? So the objectives for today is to understand the importance of GAP, recognize the benefits of implementing GAP where applicable, and be aware of the key GAP principles. So what are good agricultural practices? Before I read that statement by FAO, if you think about good agricultural practices, and you'll see that by the end of the session, it's really about common sense. And a lot of the things we'll touch on is not new or should not be new. There might be a few tidbits, but we're all putting it all together. It's really about common sense. And I want you to think about the food safety principles we applied in Thursday's session, and then take those learnings, and then how do you transfer them into your backyard gardening, into your agro processing, or into your farming. So that's what we are going to do. We're going to look at food safety, we applied it to us, and now we're going to see how it applies to our food. So good agricultural practices are specific methods which, when applied to agriculture, create food for consumer or further processing that is safe and wholesome. Remember, we said safe food. A lot of people get sick from foodborne illness. And we are the #1 primary consumers, primary producers of food. The fact that we are going to grow food we have a responsibility, whether it's selling it by the roadside, whether it's feeding it to our families, or whether it's selling it to a supermarket or importing or exporting it. Now, a lot of the food safety principles you will hear will apply to the produce. And the reason why to produce, it's because the produce, once it gets contaminated, you cannot get rid of the bacteria. Washing it will not do a good job in getting it. And there's no further kill step. You eat it mostly raw. So once you get it contaminated, it's really, really hard to not to get rid of the contamination. So most of what I'm gonna talk about is gonna focus on primarily produce, fruits that doesn't get a kill step. And a kill step means I'm not gonna boil it, I'm not gonna process it to further reduce presence of microorganisms. Okay? Next. So good agricultural practices, when you hear of good agricultural practices, most of the time you hear it associated with food safety, but it's actually 4 pillars. One is economic viability, because of applying it definitely saves food. Environmental stability, because it helps with the erosion, soil erosion. Social adaptability. And number 4, which is the one we are going to talk about, is food safety and quality. Now, I want to differentiate between food safety and food quality. Food safety makes people sick if the food is not produced in a safe manner. So food safety is, remember we talked about the good, the bad, the ugly. Food safety is the ugly. Food quality, which is as important, but it will not make you sick. It will probably reduce your sale because the food will spoil. It wouldn't taste good, but it wouldn't make you sick. So that's the difference, food safety and food quality, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Always the ugly is the food safety aspect of the microorganisms found in food that causes recall and outbreaks and make us sick. Next slide. So we'll start off by routes to contamination. Last time we talked about cross-contamination, and we talked about moving bacteria from one place to the other. So those are the most common routes of cross-contamination. Feces, and we talked about E. coli being the feces organism. So if you find E. coli in your food, most of the time it's coming from feces. There is some fecal contamination. So somebody didn't wash their hands, or you had animals in the field, or you use raw manure. Those are what is the #1 cause of feces. Again, E. coli and poop. Clothing, and think about it, we talked about when we wear clothes. If you are in the restaurant and you see the people with their clothes, they cooking the raw food, going to the side of the ready-to-eat food. If you on the farms feeding your chicken, and then you leave the chicken, then you go into the produce side and harvest your lettuce. Those are cross-contamination. And hands, of course, your hands, no matter where you are our #1 source of contamination. We talked about gloves as a protection for minimizing it, which can work, but only if we use the gloves as it was intended to. That we don't use the gloves to pick up the trash, at the same time turn around, use the money, and at the same time serve food. Your footwear is another source of contamination. I know there are some places where people have different footwear for inside and outside. You can't go in any house in Canada with your shoes on. You have to take the shoes off, which I hate because then I have to touch everybody else's shoes. But footwear, if you are going from outside with it, think about it. It's tracking a lot of dirt, a lot of germs. tools and equipment. We don't go back a little bit. We went, yeah. Tools and equipment is another one. So when we use the tools, remember we use tools in the kitchen, and we said we can use the cutting board and the knives to cut raw food, and then use it to cut the salad. And then, of course, if you are sick and you are injured, so that's why we say people who are sick and who are injured, if you have a cut on your hands, you need to cut it, cover it, or wear gloves. If you are sick, we recommend staying home because that's one way of spreading germs. Hepatitis is notorious for that. Restaurant workers gets hepatitis, and then they pass it on to the food. And the illness that you get from it is fast and furious, and it's a 2-bucket disease. So illness, it's important. So those are the key routes. There's others, but those are the main routes of contamination. So think about that as we go through the program. Okay, Latoya. So what are the benefits of GAP? We talked about improved food safety, in that you are going to be aware, you're going to follow the principles, you're going to do your farm plan. It also enhances your crop quality because you're having the right water, the right manure. It increased market access, and it's not for everyone, but if you can let a vendor know, or let a customer know, or let a hotel or wherever you're selling your food, if they know you have good agriculture practices certification, they are more likely to get your food versus somebody who doesn't have it. And again, you talked about sustainable agriculture and farming. It also helps with the environment. Next slide. So the GAP principles, we'll go about them. So they have hygiene and sanitation, water quality and usage, soil management, crop management, harvesting, and post-harvest handling. All right, here. Next slide. Worker, equipment, and tool maintenance, packaging and labeling is key, especially if you're doing allergens. Waste management, environmental stewardship. We won't speak too much about that, but it's about how do you make sure that you are keeping your workers straight, you're keeping your environment, so you're not creating a problem. Third-party audits for verification. Now, for the Caribbean, that is not big, but if you were to sell your food outside of the Caribbean, you couldn't get there without a third-party audit. So in my job, before I retired, if I buy food from the Caribbean or anywhere else, I would have to send somebody into that factory to do an audit and to make sure that the audit is there. Or I would ask them to buy. So if I come to Paulette farm to buy food, before I can sign any piece of paper, Paulette would have to show me that she has a third-party audit before I can do business with you. In the Caribbean, I know it's not as critical, but it's something to think about. And oversight and enforcement. That's another principle, but it's not as enforced in the Caribbean. And one of the reasons why we have a lot of problems, we have a lot of standards, and I'm sure you guys will agree, some of them you can't read, but it's not, enforcement is lacking. And then like in some other developed countries, you have a whole set of people that's going in there, they're checking the restaurants. In a company like Kellogg, we have FDA, USDA, McDonald's, everybody's coming to look at us. The law comes in, and if they find out you have stuff, they will shut you down in a heartbeat. But we don't have a lot of oversight when it comes to food safety, and definitely not a lot of enforcement. If that is not your experience, I'd like to hear about it. But my experience has been where we are for food safety in SKN and the rest of the Caribbean, our oversight and enforcement is lacking. Anybody have a different point of view on that? Is everybody still here? Helen, did we lose everyone? I see 43 people, but I'm not hearing anything. Can you guys hear me? Yes, yes, yes. Good. If for nothing else, I just want to make sure you guys are still awake, so thank you. All right, next slide. So the challenge is, when we talk about good agricultural practices, I know it's difficult. It's developed in developed countries. It's even worse to implement a formal program. Yes, Sheridan said they don't understand dealing with allergies. That's very true. Allergies is not something that Latin America and the Caribbean deal with. So ISO is the standard that we use for food. Everybody has ISO standards. And the good thing about it, every single Caribbean island I have interacted with and do some research on, they all have standard. The Bureau of Standards, oh my God, you can find any standard you need. You need a PhD to translate what that standard means. And in some cases you have to buy it. The lack of transparency is that it's not translated to the local standards. So the ISO standard, the principles are the same, but the implementation has to match the local standard. So I can't tell you to have a SQF audit in SKN if there is no SQF auditor. So I might have to tell you, you might have a health inspector come in. So I need to translate the third-party audit requirement so it meets your local standards. So a challenge for GAP implementation in the Caribbean and in most developed countries is the lack of translation to local standards. First of all, the standards, we adopt them and we have no input into it. And I will tell you, the standards are not designed for developed country, which is one of my frustrations. We develop the standards. It's not developed for underdeveloped country. They're designed for developed countries, and the expectation is that the underdeveloped countries will implement them, which makes it very, very difficult to implement. One example is to say you have to have shoes. When we go to Egypt, people don't wear shoes in some part of those countries. So how am I going to implement that if the method there is not to wear shoes? So we just have to be able to know what the local standards are. Your food safety does not change. How you implement it is what changes. Next slide. Next challenge is lack of financial support. And I know all of you are aware and know very well the challenges with getting a loan, the challenges with getting funding, the challenges with having a resource where you can get a grant, especially if you are small farmers, because nobody wants to invest in giving their money to small farms. People who have money, they want to make sure that they are getting a return on investment. In developed countries, it's much easier to get a grant or to get somebody to support you to do that. Unfortunately for us, financial support becomes even more of a barrier. Next slide. Again, increase in production costs. If you are going to apply GAP or in agro-processing HACCP, record keeping can be challenging. You need to test water and soil. And I have found out it's hard because there is not a lot of areas, and I'm not sure exactly what it is with SKN, but I'm sure it's about the same. There is no place to test for food or soil testing, or even to get a regular pH. It's hard. And some of those you'll see that we need testing. And then certifications is hard to come by. So those are some of the challenges with GAP, but it's not impossible. As we go through them, you'll see what are the things you can apply to help your farm or your agro process enhance the safety of the food. Next slide. So, very good. There is a soil testing lab in SKN. That is way ahead of a lot of the areas that I've been teaching. So that's good news. Hopefully everybody aware of where it is, and the cost of the testing is not prohibitive. So how do we implement gaps? So there's a few steps and we'll go through them. So we have to assess our current practices. So where are you now? If you have a backyard garden, you can do the same thing. If you have a small farm, a big farm, or agro processing, the first thing you need to do is go ahead and say, where am I after I did that training? What do I have? What do I don't have? Where are my gaps? And that will be in your food safety plan. Then you develop a plan, how, like everything else, where do I start? How do I train my farm workers if I have farm workers? How do I monitor and record activities? And how do I continuously improve? Those are the processes you're gonna need for implementation and sustainability of good agricultural practice. And when I go back again, and I want you to remember this, do not tell me, show me. In God we trust, everybody else show paper. If you tell me I have a GAP plan, but you can't show me any documentation as a supplier, I'm not gonna believe you unless I see paper. So documentation becomes critical. Next slide, please. Somebody said the Taiwanese in SKN will do the soil testing for free. I hope everybody knows that. Thanks for that information. So in developing a GAP plan, you have to understand your facility. You have make sure it's tailored to your plan, your farm, not this person who have not A1 farm. A1 farm is a big farm. They have a different thing. You guys all aware of A1 farm with Market Trust. You guys may have already gone to your visit. I don't know. But make sure you are doing your plan for your specific farm. And then you have the key elements of GAP in your plan. Next slide. The first thing you're gonna do is look at your farm layout. Whether you have a backyard garden or you have a big garden, what is the layout of the farm? And the reason the layout is important, you will see, is to prevent cross-contamination. And you have areas for different crops or different activities, so you're reducing cross-contamination. Next slide. So everybody who has a farm, whether it's like this slide, it's a backyard garden. So I have a backyard garden. I had peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers, lettuce. And then I also had Irish potatoes. So I separated them out. The peppers was in one place because the peppers are going to be further processed. The lettuce was in a different side, the tomatoes a different side. So I have a very, very small, I live in New York, so I have a very small piece of land, but I got all the fruits out of it. So making sure you organize it. So you are separating out raw from finished, from ready to eat, and also keeping the path away from animals. Next slide. So here's another farm layout. So you see here where you have, this is a bigger farm. You'll have fruit trees to one side. You have your produce in the middle. Then you have your herbs on the other side. And then this farm has a chicken coop. But that chicken coop becomes really critical because you want to put it away from the farm. You don't want to put it where if you wash it, the runoff is going to go into your produce section. So, and then you also have to walk about the tracking. How do you track it? Make sure it doesn't track into your garden. So be careful if you have a chicken coop or if you have other animals walking around that you are not cross-contaminating inadvertently, you're ready to eat produce. So your farm layout is the first thing you're going to do. If you already have a farm and you want to say, what do I have? How do I sketch it? Is my farm already laid out so I'm not creating a food safety risk? It doesn't have to be a big farm, like I said, and you don't have to create a major work on it, but it's just trying to keep in mind that what can I do to minimize risk? Next slide. So let's look at gap before planting. So if we are going to do gap, we want to know, does the planting area produce any risk? And that also becomes important for when we do organic. But this one we like, what are the risks? You can click on a few of those. So were animals allowed to graze there for it? And the reason, we all know the reason why not allowing the animal to graze is because the animal can use their feces and poop on the farm and create a microbial environment. If you have regularly flooded area, again, the flooding can bring microorganisms from different parts of your land. If they can come from a horse farm or cow farm and then flood into your area and bring different places. We'll talk a little bit more about fresh manure, if you have fresh manure there, and chemical pollutants. So we have a power outage in the area from Lorenzino. So can people still hear me? Can you just, Latoya, you still there, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. So we still have a few people, so that's good. Hopefully we'll continue. All right, so when you do your gap before planting, before you decide you are going to plant, think about those areas, right? And next slide. And if you find those risks, don't just leave them. I know you can do much about some of them and we are limited to the amount of land that we have. It says do not use without corrective action to manage the risk. So if you find that you have animal grazing on the farm, one thing you could do is say, okay, either I'm gonna move my animal to another side of the farm, or I'm not gonna plant produce in that area. I'm gonna use that for fruit trees maybe, or something else that is going to be cooked, that is not eaten raw. And then if you have taken action, make sure you have a record of the action. So just put somewhere, you don't have to have a big fancy computer. You can have a notebook if that's all you have, and you say, hey, here's what I did, what day, what time. Okay, next slide. So now that you've analyzed you can keep clicking. You've analyzed your farm. When you are planting, it's really important to ensure that you, again, keep the domestic animals, I mean your dogs, your cats, your pets away from your garden. Keep the dogs away from the garden because, again, they can cause contamination. We'll talk a little bit more about water, but be careful the water you use for irrigation or for watering the plant. We'll talk about rainwater and the different kinds of water. And if you do tomatoes and other vine trees, that's produce, try to stake them. So the reason for staking them is for a couple of reasons. One, Can you remember to mute if you're not talking? Thank you. And you stake the tomatoes to keep it off the ground. For food safety standpoint, that's the main reason for staking your vegetables. So they're not in contact with the soil. And again, in this case, we'll talk a little bit about it. The farmers, you can't be sick without that. In some fruits and vegetables, when we've done some research, we found that bacteria can actually grow in the soil, and you find it inside the fruits. The flowers will take up some of the bacteria, and in some cases, it's not broad, but we found example where the E. coli can grow in the flower and get incorporated in the fruit. So we have to be very careful in planting. Next one. Click a few again. Now, this one, I would like to have a discussion about that. So it says, do not apply raw manure to a vegetable or crop. Why do you guys believe raw manure is an issue? Or first of all, 2 questions. Do you currently use raw manure? And second, why do you think raw manure is a problem? You can either speak
Pretty
up or you
harsh.
can type it. Sheridan?
It's pretty harsh.
Pretty
Yeah.
harsh. What
Yeah,
do you mean by harsh?
harsh, like the raw manure, the ammonia in the urine and stuff like that.
Yes, so it's harsh to the soil. It can burn the soil. That's very good. What else? Think about manure. What is manure?
Also, to add to that, the manure itself, it would have certain bacterias in it, and if it's not breaking down, if it's not broken down properly, it will literally be in the soil. It would affect everything when it comes to plant growth, the health of the soil, and then, yeah, it would just not be good.
Yep. Anybody else? What's manure? Where does manure come from? Remember I said E. coli was an example of what kind of bacteria? Where did E. coli come from? Remember I mentioned that?
It's waste.
Feces.
From the
A
back.
species. Ding, 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 ding. Yes. So when you think about manure, manure is poop. And we talked about poop being loaded with bacteria. We talk about the flies landing on the poop and coming out of food and carrying those millions and millions of germs. So the cow manure that we use, and for me it was a surprise because growing up in the Caribbean, I know my grandparents used to farm and everybody took raw manure and they put it in the soil and it was okay. But when you think about the manure, I'm not saying not to use it. I'm saying the fresh raw manure, the cow dung, when you put it in your fruits and vegetables, you are creating an environment where you have feces and then you encourage bacteria growth that will potentially touch your vegetables, especially your lettuce, your leafy greens, that you cannot get rid of once it's contaminated. It's very challenging. The lettuce leaves, even when you can see the dirt and you try to wash it, you can't get everything out. Remember, the bacteria cannot be seen, so it's really hard to get rid of bacteria once it's contaminated. So we'll talk about how do you use manure. There's other options. It's just not using the raw manure. You have to let it sit aside for it to break down over time. You can treat it. Some people leave it in the sun, they turn it over. Some people bake it, process it. So there's different ways to use it. So again, I know it's common practice for us to use manure, but if we're gonna use raw manure. And then when we use manure piles, if we decide to treat the manure ourselves, we need to make sure it's not anywhere close to our produce, our ready-to-eat farms, so that it's not running, so you don't have runoff. Okay, next one. During harvesting, again, it becomes even more critical because that's your ready-to-eat food. You have to keep your tools and the people that's clean there, because basically you are going to take that food and sell it to somebody else. If you are going to use equipment, make sure you don't use the equipment that you use for raw or for carrying the dirt or the treated manure for the ready-to-eat produce. And again, when I talked about GAP being common sense, think about GAP as I'm gonna take this chives, or I forgot the name for it, but and cut it up and then use it in my salad or something else. Or I'm cutting a head of lettuce. I want to make sure that that head of lettuce is not already contaminated with microorganisms that will make people sick. Okay, whether it's for my family or whether I'm selling it out to the market or on the roadside. Next one. So workers, again, who are handling the fresh produce must be healthy and follow good hygiene practices. Good hygienic practices, I missed that word there. So on these leaves, there's a number of recalls, big recalls because of lettuce, because the workers, and I'm gonna use the ones in the US because that's the example I have. If you've ever gone and seen the land, so it's like 3 cricket field or 4 cricket field of produce that those people grow. And then they use migrant workers. And unfortunately, they don't have the adequate facilities, or the facilities are so far away that they use the field to go under the number 2. Some of them have hepatitis, and when they don't have hands covering, we had major recall because the spinach leaves and the lettuce got contaminated through the workers' hands. And that's one place where glove can work. In that case, if you have germs in your body, that minimizes the risk. So that is very critical process that we have to use. So when you have your garden, part of the process is making sure that your workers are trained in good GMPs, that your manure, your water, and your employees are trained so that on the process, you're creating a culture where you are always making safe food. Remember, in your garden, in your farm, you are making food. And think of yourself, is that the food I want to give my family? And if I don't want to eat it myself, why would I want to give it to somebody else? Okay, next slide. So in this, I'm gonna ask you to wake up again. This is a processing plant where they have the bananas that they are cleaning. So I need you guys to see how many hazards you can spot in this environment. You can either speak out or you can type it. Or you can put your hands up.
Broken gloves.
Broken gloves. Why is that? What is the problem with the broken gloves? Tell me, why is that a risk?
Because if they have if their hands are contaminated, then the contamination would pass to the bananas if they're trying to wash them.
Yes, that's very good. Also, what physical hazard can it cause? Can you think of a physical hazard? What about the pieces of gloves that can go along with the process and not be separated out? So that can also be a physical hazard. So it could be microbial and could be physical. Thank you, Sheridan. What other hazard? Can anybody notice anything else?
One of the workers actually not wearing gloves, but touching the produce.
Yes. One not wearing gloves, but touching the produce. So that could be good and that could be bad. Remember I said using gloves, if he washed his hands and he follows good GMP, then he may be able to get away with it because the bananas most likely will be cooked. And if you're eating it right, you will take the skin off. But yes, that's a potential hazard. Again, on your farm, you have to decide what is your glove policy. A lot of the groups in the developed countries, they get shut down because of improper use of gloves. So the inspector will come and observe, and then they will see that the person used the same glove hands to touch the packaging and then touch the food, or touch the garbage can and touch this, or touch their face and then did not wash the gloves. So good observation.
They have
Anything-
some of the bananas on the edge, so if they have contaminated clothes, then
Yep. And also what's happening with the water?
mm,
I think the best,
It's flowing over the edge.
Yeah, it's flowing over the edge, which is causing a hazard. If you can look on the side, you can see some greenish thing, and my bet is it's probably moldy, which means they're probably not using the proper water. Anything else?
to me, the guy to the back is washing the bananas them properly because they have proper drainage.
Yeah. That could be good because it's not in deep water. That's true. What about the hennets? The white hennet, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
it's a good thing, but they're not completely on.
Yes. So the one to the right with the head tie is a little bit, I still have hair sticking out, but the one with the brown net, so definitely that's the wrong hennet because it's not holding anything back. And on top of that, she's not completely covering her hair, but you notice it's like a net, right? And hair pieces can come out from there. Great. And again, the water is another potential problem because if the water is not chlorinated or it's not circulated, you can create a germ bath. Okay,
The guy in the back is not wearing any gloves.
that where we said that the one in the back is not wearing any gloves. That is very true. Yes. So those are the kind of things we need to look for, right? Okay, next slide. So cleaning and sanitation. Let's talk about cleaning and sanitation. In your farm, we talk about cleaning and sanitation. So cleaning is good. Cleaning does not get rid of bacteria. That is a true statement. Cleaning by itself will not get rid of the bacteria because the bacteria, you cannot see it with your naked eye. You need a soap or a sanitizer to get rid of the bacteria on the surfaces or on your hands or on equipment. Now, if you remember, if I don't have a picture of it, but if you see, if I put glow germ, that purple thing on your hands, we've done a couple of experiments with the kids in school, and we tell them to go wash their hands. We put the glow germ in, they wash their hands first without the soap, and you can see the glow germ, and then they wash it with soap, then you could see less. And if they use a little bit of sanitizer, then you can see even more. But it's really, really hard for those that did not wash their hands long enough. So you'll see it. It's a good way for teaching kids how, and for us also to see that bacteria does not, you can't get rid of bacteria just by washing your hands. Some people will say use warm water if you have it, because the warm water will take even more out. But the only reason where you can get it is to use soap or a sanitizer. And in a little bit of a cup of bleach goes a long way. Or I know you guys use vinegar and some other acidic tools which can help, but I'll tell you, a little bit of chlorine goes a long, long way and is proven to be very, very effective. But it's not organic and it's chemical. I understand that. Next slide. So when you are cleaning, you need to identify packaging and storage area, equipment and tools that may be source of contamination and do regular cleaning. Now in this packaging house, there's so many hazards because they're using a wooden pallet, and wooden pallet, just like wooden cutting board, is a major source of bacterial contamination. And they're also stacking food on top of each other, bottoms up, bottoms up. And so two, that makes it hard to clean those areas and sanitize it. So then you have potential for contamination. So for you to be able to clean and sanitize, you have to have access to the surface. And if you can't get the surface clean, then you cannot sanitize it. That red and blue container looks really hard to move because there's so much around it. And then it looks, if the floor is wet, you can get bacteria on there. The good news is there's nothing on the floor. It looks like it's on a pallet, even though the pallet looks in bad shape, but I don't see in this picture, not a lot of the stuff on the floor. So you shouldn't put your tools and on the floor again, always think cross-contamination. So for cleaning and sanitizing of your tools, water alone will not get rid of the bacteria. It will get rid of most of the gross soil contamination, but you need some level of sanitizer to get rid of bacteria or microorganisms. Remember that part. If you don't remember anything else, remember that. Next slide. So for sanitizers, identify packaging, storage area, we talked about that. And then understand if you're going to use sanitizer, have a standard operating procedure for cleaning and sanitizing. So your workers should know when to clean, how to clean, where to clean, what type to clean. If you have a packing house, try not to use a hose, because when you use a hose, the hose it's a lot of fun to take the hose and spread the water out and just squish it. What that does, it takes the bacteria from the floor or the surface and it spreads it out. So you want to use a mop or something else that's not going to spread. And if you use the mop, try not to use the mop that has the strings. You know, those stringy head mops, I don't think I have one, but the stringy head mops, if you have an agro-processing facility, try not to use those because those are hard to clean. They're like sponges. And then the little pieces, they drag things around. So don't use those. Use a squeegee or some other form that will not spread. Okay. Next slide. Your tools becomes important. Now, there's a lot of tools on the floor or on the ground. You want to try to keep the tools away from the ground, especially the ones you are going to use in your ready-to-eat produce for harvesting. And make sure if you're going to use a tool for raking, that you're not using it to harvest food. Again, remember I keep saying it's common sense. Now, if you have only one tool, that doesn't mean you can't use it, but what do you have to do if you're gonna use one tool for raking and one tool for harvesting? What would you need to do with that tool?
Wash and
Any-
sanitize.
Wash and sanitize. Sheridan, thank you. So I know it's not everybody that have separate tools. In some countries, we have what we call color coding, especially in agro-processing. So you have red, yellow, green, and white. And anything with white is used for processing area. Anything with red is for the flow and so on. But if you don't have the luxury, you can always clean and sanitize in between. Thanks, Sheridan. Next. Now, oh yes, I have that mop. You see that little mop over there? It's okay, but it's hard to clean and dry, and the little pieces around it tend to spread germs around a little more. So you want to stay away from those if you have them. If you still have them, be aware of what they're doing and clean and sanitize them as much as you can. Put them in boiling water, put them in a bottle of sanitizer, and think of them as a sponge and how much they can take contamination and maintain it. So if you have one and you don't have no other choice, make sure you're cleaning it and sanitizing it. And in this case, make sure after you use it, you dry it. Okay. We had a situation where in a factory, they were getting salmonella in the plant and they couldn't figure out where it was coming from until we sent somebody in and found out they were cleaning using that sponge and going from one room to the other. The cleaning guy would come at night, and when we came in, the room was sparkly clean, but then he was going from an area that was contaminated and moving it to the other side and getting it to the food. So those are real life examples. They really happen, unfortunately. Next slide. So packing and labeling, again, that's important. No matter what you use, you have to be very careful for chemical contaminants if you are going to use plastic. You also need to worry about microbial contaminants, that you don't have the plastic sitting on the outside when you're cleaning and it gets contaminated and you take your produce and you wrap it in there. And labeling becomes important because for a number of reasons. One, for allergens, if you have allergens in there. Two, so you can know your date and time and the freshness of your fruit. And then it also gives a lot of information to the consumers. But most importantly, we'll talk a little bit about traceability and how do you trace your food back to where you grow it. And one of the ways you do that, it's with your labeling, with your time and date. Some people have big fancy labels, but some people have, it could just be a regular label with a pen and pencil. Again, if you use a marker, you have to make sure that the marker is not using toxic chemicals that can seep through the food. So food becomes so critical. If you use a box and you don't have a liner in there, you need to be very careful. It also affects the quality of your food as well as the food safety. I talk about the food safety more because this is what the course is about, and it makes you sick. But it can also bruise your fruits and vegetables, how you package it. So when you think about GAP goes all the way down from before you select your facility until you sell it in the market. Next slide. So here's another opportunity to spot the hazard. And I'm sure a lot of you say, yeah, that doesn't happen. Very similar to when we were in the processing of the bananas. Let's see how many hazards you can spot with this means of transportation. Sheridan had a question, 1 second. Should you display your cleaning and sanitizing log in a public area? Definitely, you should display it in a public area. The reason, one being your customers will know. Two, your workers are trained and they know where to find it and what to use it for. Good question, Sheridan. Okay, spot the hazard in this mode of transportation.
Stacking,
Stacking, and
food is
we talked
uncovered.
about that, yes. The rest,
The food is uncovered.
food is uncovered. Now, tell me, I know this is really, really hard for us in the Caribbean, including Mexico and Latin America and Africa. So how do we go about that? First of all, why should we cover it?
Because of the stacking,
Yeah.
whatever contaminants are on the bottom of those crates, they're just
Yeah,
going to leach onto whatever is below them, whatever food is below them. So
Yeah,
having the
okay,
covering would help to cut down on the cross contamination.
okay. What other reason is not covering it a risk?
Plus the sun is going to wilt those food very quickly.
The sun is gonna wilt it very quickly. What else? What other environmental impacts?
Dust.
Dust, bugs.
Dust, and our friendly birds can poop on it, right?
Yep.
And we know sometimes we go by the river, by whatever, we're contaminating those fruits and veggies. So we have to find a way to put a covering, a topping over it. And I know that's hard, but we need to try and break that chain. So we said the stacking, we said it's uncovered. What else? What about the crates?
They're not
They're-
secured,
They what?
not secured with the open back.
They're not secured with the open back. What else about it's not labeled? Yes, very good. What else? We talked about it a little bit. Wooden crates, yes. What's wrong with the wooden crates? Vern said
Ideal
wooden
breeding
crate,
room
and
for
I said
germs.
so.
They create an
Right, Helen?
ideal breeding room for germs.
It's a breeding room for germs. And have you ever tried to clean a wooden crate? It's really, really hard to clean it with water because it absorbs the moisture, it doesn't dry, and it keeps the bacteria, yes. So we use wooden crates. If we don't have a choice and we have wooden crates, what should we do? How do you get around that?
you could probably line them with something.
Yes, yes. You can use clean liners to put in there so they're not making direct contact. Put plastic first in the box. Yes, very good. So the liner will help it, and use disposable liners where possible. It will keep it clean. Okay? And then the other thing, if you are going to use a truck like that, you must be able to clean between and make sure that truck is not used to transport manure or transport something else, animals. Again, and if they are, that you have a proper place for cleaning and sanitizing before you put your precious fruits and vegetables. We spend so much time in finding the fields, growing it, finding the seeds. And when we're ready to sell it, we want to make sure that we are not impacting our harvest. Okay? Good. Next slide. So I want to skip this a little bit and then we'll come back towards the end and do it if you guys don't mind. So let's skip the Jeopardy and come back. So what I'm going to do in the next few slides, I'm going to talk about, so we talked about the key things you have to do in your farm, whether it's a garden or a farm, or if you are doing a little bit of agro processing. But what I'm gonna do in the next few minutes, next 15 minutes or so, is go through the water, the soil, and then we'll do a little bit about traceability. So let's talk about soil. We talk a lot about what do you need to do to grow the food properly. So soil amendments are treated, there's treated one, and those are cured compost, pelleted chicken manure, treated manure, and bone meal. So those are the kind of manure that we say it's acceptable. Remember I said you cannot use the untreated one. So the treated soil amendments, which you can buy in the stores, I know in St. Lucia, you can buy the pelleted chicken manure, you can buy the cured compost, you can buy some of the other manures. I think SKN you can as well. Can somebody agree or disagree or approve that? I think Marky said you can get some, but I don't remember. Can you buy those in the store? The pelleted chicken manure, or you can buy it somewhere, or you make your own. Anybody uses any of those? Did I lose you guys again?
No, wait, I'm here.
Okay. So those are example of soil amendments, and those are the things you put in your soil to enhance the growth. We talked about the cured compost, pelleted chicken, treated manure, and bone meal. Those are all things that you use to enrich your environment. You have to get it from the chicken farm, says Julianne. And Julianne, if you get it from the chicken farm, are the chicken farm treating them? So if the chicken farmer has to not just give you the chicken, they have to treat it. And most of the time they'll dry it. One of the ways of doing that is drying it. They can either sun dry it, or some people in other places, they put it in a hot box. So if you can buy it from there, that's fine. And remember, chicken is #1 for Campylobacter. So the poop is not any different, but you have to dry it first. Yes, Julian said they dry it first. That's good. There's no pelleted chicken manure here. So I think you can make your own. You can process it, or you can let it stay in the sun if you have a big enough farm, or if you're doing home farming. But you want to apply it way before you start growing. Okay. Next slide. So here are some of the risks, and I put it on different amendments that you can use, and you may use some of those, or if you don't use some, I'd like to know what else you use for your amendments. So yard trimmings, mulch, pit moss. So for me, when I do my backyard garden, when I do my lawn, I'll take the grass trimmings, I'll put them out to dry, and I'll use them for my mulch. So I get a lot of grass trimming. Every time I finish, I'll take it from the lawnmower, I'll spread it out, because if I don't spread it out, what happens, then the seeds grow, and then it creates even more problem for weeding. So I let it dry down so it's almost like a straw, and then I can use it to mulch my garden. So yard trimmings you guys can do. If you pull out weed, you can let it sit out and dry and then reapply it. Mulch, you have different kind of mulch you can use. Peat moss is another way of using it. Fully cured, so those are all less risky because they're not going to try, they don't have a lot of bacterial risk or even chemical. The cured compost, remember I said compost that's cured, the chicken pellets, or the your compost pile. When you create compost, if you sit there and you let them cure, let them process, it's fermented, so that's not an issue. Aged manure, right? Aged manure is not less risky. It still has a risk, but it's not as risky as raw animal manure. So those are the level of risk. So for those of you who have farms and you use soil amendments, are there anything that you are using now that's not on there? Anybody, what do you use for manure, for soil amendments, or do you or do not use manure? Leaf trimmings, thank you, Julianne. That's a very easy one to use. It's not costly and it's very safe. Anything else that you guys use that's not on there? Composting is common because you can make your own compost, but then you have to be careful that you let it cure, let it ferment and break down all the bacteria. Seaweed, yes. A lot of people use seaweed because the sargassum that we have too much of in the Caribbean. I don't know if SKN is fortunate to have sargassum, that nasty, smelly seaweed. But yes, it's very rich in nutrients and low in potential contamination. So that's a lot, yes. So you can use it in your garden and it's safe from a microbial standpoint. Of course, you have to let it dry, but yes, you can use that. Okay. Okay, so your soil amendments, you have to be very careful that it doesn't create an additional hazard. Especially, remember I said, it's not, if you're doing yams and stuff that's going to be cooked, it's less a problem. It's if you are going to use produce and fruits and vegetables, that's gonna be eaten raw. And definitely if you have an organic farm. Okay, next slide. So water, water, water. We all need water. So we have rainwater, river water, municipality water. Valeria Thompson, he used seaweed, wet or dried, use seawater also. Good. The seawater, I'm not sure because it has so much high level of sodium. I know from a bacteria standpoint, it's not a problem, but it might create other problems, but I don't know. It puts a lot of sodium in your water. So rainwater, river water, municipality water, all that is water that we have access to. And we need to know the source of our water. Not all water is created equal. Water can be good, but it can also create a problem. So let's look at each one of them. Next slide. So water is a good source of food safety risk because it can spread from one piece of produce to your entire crop. And I don't know if you guys heard in the last couple of years in America, in Europe, they had major food recalls of bag lettuce and cantaloupe. In the bag lettuce, what you have, why? And so let me give you a piece of advice. If you can, do not buy bag lettuce. If you prepare bag lettuce, be very careful how you prepare it, because what happens is you are harvesting a lot of produce. And then you are taking it to a shed, to a packing house where it gets chopped up. First of all, it comes from the farm in those dirty trucks. They bring it into the packing house and everything is stacked because they're trying to save space. And then it's chopped into little pieces. So if you have one head of lettuce that's contaminated in the past, before you used to have bag lettuce, that one lettuce would only impact the one person that eats it. Now, because you are creating the bag lettuce and you are chopping it up in pieces, you are doing a couple of things. You're taking a potentially contaminated lettuce and giving hundreds of pieces and it's cross-contaminating it. You're also putting it in a bag and the bag can create an environment for growth. Now they tell you again, don't wash your bag lettuce. I don't have to worry about that because I don't buy bag lettuce or bag anything for that reason. The reason they tell you not to wash it, it's like the chicken that you spread it. But it's too late at that point because you already spread it. So if you are going to produce bag anything, be careful that you're not mixing it. And most importantly, you are preventing contamination by not using raw manure, by making sure your animals are not walking the farm and that you're cleaning and sanitizing. So there's a lot of recalls with those right now. The cantaloupe, there was a big cantaloupe recall. And the reason for the cantaloupe recall, they were putting the cantaloupe because they didn't want to bruise it. They would bring it into the farm and somebody was really smart. They created a sponge tray. So they had the belt and they put the big pieces of, like the mattress kind of sponge. And they would put the cantaloupes on there. Unfortunately, they didn't wash the cantaloupe, they didn't wash the material. And so the cantaloupes got contaminated. And then you will tell me, but why? Nobody's eating the cantaloupe skin. In addition to the absorbency where the germs, the water was seeping into the cantaloupe, what happened when you buy cantaloupe? You have to cut it. And when they were cutting the cantaloupe, when you use a knife to cut, the knife is dragging whatever's on the outside to the inside, and then you eat that, and a lot of people were getting sick. Of course, that factory went out of business, but again, the lesson there is when you are trying to put in a fix, the fix was to not bruise the cantaloupe, but they didn't think about you bringing in the dirty cantaloupe, you're trying to do the right thing by washing it, but then you have the sponge, which is collecting the germs and the bacteria and multiplying because it's in a temperature that's in the danger zone and it's creating an issue. This is important because once the produce is contaminated with pathogen, it cannot easily be removed. Now me, when I buy lettuce, if I'm not growing it myself, or cantaloupe, when I bring my fruits home, my family think I'm crazy, but I will take a spoonful or a few drops of chlorine in water, and I will wash my lettuce and my vegetables in there before I put them on the table. Call me crazy, but I try to be safe. It doesn't take a lot. Okay, next slide. So again, let's look at the probability of the risk of water. So the public water supplies, and I think SKN has good water because the city water, they use it, they treat it, right? Chlorine in what form? Oh, I use some, Tracy, I use a bleach. Like regular bleach, a little, but very little one. You never even tasted. So the question was chlorine in what form? All right, so here's the risk, just like I showed you the risk before of the different places. So water, the public water supply. What is your water company in SKN? Wasco uses St. Lucia. What do you guys use in SKN? What is your water, your public water company for SKN? Anybody? I know somebody knows. It's not Wasco. What is it?
The water is supplied from the government, so it's
Yeah, but what's the name of the company?
water department.
It's called what?
There's no acronym. It's just
Oh, there's no
called
acronym, so that it's just the government water. Okay, so like in St. Lucia, they use Wasco, and Wasco is the waterworks. So in Nevis, you just use the water. So this is supposed to be Nevis Water Department, yeah. So this is supposed to be the safest water if you're going to use it, because they are supposed to treat the water when they get it. They're supposed to have this whole thing and treat it. So that is supposedly the safest water. The next one you have is the groundwater, well water. It's okay depending on how far the groundwater is, because the source of contamination mostly is surface. So in the river and your surface water, that's where you have your worst contamination. And so when you're thinking about your irrigation, next slide, again, we're talking about irrigation where you're gonna add water to your fruits and vegetables. If you're gonna add it to fruits that's gonna get cooked, that you cannot eat it raw, then you have, you risk that it's less. So the type of irrigation that you use. So less risky, drip irrigation. It's less risky. Anybody can tell me why? Anybody want to guess why drip is less risky than overhead?
It's closer to the ground, closer to the plants, less surface area to cover in terms of picking up contaminants on the way to the plants.
Yes, so you're not adding it. Very good. Thanks, Therese. Because you're not adding it directly to the fruits and vegetables, it goes into the ground. So better if you're gonna water your plants or you're gonna irrigate it, do the drip. Flood is more risky because for that same reason, and definitely overhead is very risky because you're adding it to your plants. And if that flood irrigation is using river water or some other contaminated water, you contaminate your produce. And remember, produce cannot be cleaned and sanitized effectively. Okay, so if you use irrigation, or even if when you do your backyard garden, and you're gonna use water, try to put it in the roots, not on the surface of the plants. Okay, next slide. Again, municipal water, we said, less risky, surface water higher, well water. Next one. Before I go into this, how many of us use rainwater? I thought I had a slide for rain, but I don't see it. We can talk about it now. How many people, does anybody here use rainwater in the garden?
Yes.
Yes, I do. In my backyard garden though, which is easier.
Backyard garden. And we say water from heaven, right?
Yes.
So rainwater is a tricky one. So rainwater can be very risky based on where you collect it and how you hold it. So somebody tells me, what's your problem? The weather's coming from heaven. We can't prevent it from getting into our garden. It's not a problem. The problem is if you do like most people, you are collecting the rainwater from a roof or from under the surface, right?
Yes.
And then what's on that roof?
Germs.
You are washing the roof and taking all that water there, right? And then also the other problem with rainwater is that you put it in a container and you can store it for a long time, and you are storing it outside at room temperature. It creates another breeding ground for bacteria. So rainwater coming straight from heaven into your garden, not a problem. Rainwater that you collect from a surface, like a roof or some other place you put it in, basically it's rinse water that you are using, and you're taking not only microbial, chemical, you can get rust or anything in there. And then if you store it, you guys, somebody turn your mute button on because I'm getting a lot of background noise. If you're not, don't have a question. So the rainwater, how can you collect it? First, you can put a filter on like a sock or a cheesecloth or something so that you are filtering the water when it comes from the spout. Second, if you're gonna use it in a container, keep it covered. And again, put some kind of antibacterial. Again, I like to say bleach, and I know a lot of people don't want to use that, but it's easier. You tell me vinegar, you can put it in, but vinegar is not as effective. I say 1 cup of bleach to a gallon of water is what's recommended. Okay? So rainwater, it's there, it's easy. I remember growing up running in the and bathing in the rainwater, and it's the best water we were told. But as we grow and we learn more, we need to be very careful that we're not creating a problem with the rainwater. It's not something that is obvious. You don't think about it because it's rain, right? Who would have thunk it? So if you use it, there's ways to use it. Yes, Jody, that's a myth. Everybody thought the rainwater was perfect and the best. The things we think of the perfect, the rainwater, the river water, not so much when we think about bacteria. So if you are going to collect the water and you have a funnel, a good way to do it is tie a mesh cloth, something to filter it. The bigger, more commercial plants, they use the UV, but you don't have that. Some people use charcoal to filter the water, more commercial areas. But if you're gonna use it at home, put a cheesecloth in the spout where you're collecting it from the surface into your container. And then when you store it, cover it and put 1 teaspoon, 1 capful of bleach to a gallon of water. That should keep you safe. Okay? Even in your small garden. And again, remember, you don't want to use it on top of your vegetables. If you use it right away, it's not a problem. It's if you collect it from a surface and hold on to it, that's when it becomes a problem. Okay, now let's go on testing. Go back to the other slide before we go. So frequency testing of water that you use. And that's a recommendation. I know you have water in there. They say if you use city testing frequency about 2 times per year, the most risky one about 4 times a year. Yeah. The city water, you don't have to test it because the city's already testing it. The other, the groundwater and some of those you have to test. And then the surface water, the river water, holding tanks with rainwater 4 times a year. Okay. Next slide. Now that's another one, another favorite one of mine is the water, the ice. Sheridan, yes, too much of everything is bad. Too much alcohol is bad, too much everything is bad. The bleach I'm asking to use, it's minuscule. So if you think about 1 cup per gallon, it's not harmful. You can't smell it. If you're smelling it, then you add too much. When you go to a swimming pool and you smell chlorine, most of us think that the pool is cleaner now because we can smell the chlorine. That's actually the opposite because all the chlorine have evaporated. So you don't, a lot of chlorine then doesn't work. You have a very, very small amount. So no, it's not harmful if used in the right proportion. Of course, if you put a whole bottle of chlorine in your water, then definitely it's harmful. If you drink a whole bottle of rum, then there's a whole different story. If you put a little bit in your soda, maybe not so much. Okay, let's not forget ice. Ice, ice, ice. We love ice. In that little mojito in the middle, what's wrong with the ice in this middle picture? Don't eat the ice, says Tracy. Yes, Tracy, don't eat the ice. Because ice is water. And remember, you cannot kill bacteria. Frozen doesn't kill, it preserves. So it doesn't kill it, it doesn't grow, but it preserves it. And if you have dirty water, then you are freezing it for later. So the first picture has ice, which is in a good way, that's used to freeze raw fish. That ice should be thrown out. However, if this ice is thawed out or reprocessed without a kill step and frozen, then it's contaminated. The ice with the drinks also a problem. Now, Mexico, I don't know why, is notorious for their water. If you ever go to Mexico, you will be told, don't even open your eye because you're gonna get sick. And people forget they use the water to brush their teeth. And every time we've gone to Mexico for work, somebody gets sick because they forget. They take a shower or they buy a drink and they put ice in it. Poor use of ice can be so dangerous because people don't realize that ice is contaminated and they think they're sick. They won't drink the bottled water, but they will eat the ice. Now, ice of itself, if made with proper water, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that the likelihood of using dirty water can cause a problem. It's frozen does not preserve, doesn't kill, it preserves. Remember that. Now, somebody say if you're drinking it in alcohol, you don't have to worry because the alcohol will kill it. That's probably true, but again, Russian roulette. Any question on ice usage? So if you're using ice to freeze your produce or anything else, remember that. Tracy says, true that in the US hotels, we didn't have that problem in the UK on the lawsuit where. Yes, again, in the developed countries, because there's so many regulations, it's less likely that you get sick. In the underdeveloped countries where the regulations, like in Mexico. I've been to Mexico, let me see, for work, half a dozen times. And I have gotten sick every time. One time I got sick by eating a tamarind ball. A tamarind ball and made me sick. So the water is very bad in there. They can't get, I don't know why, the filtration or whatever else. In our factory, we had to filter it 3-4 times.
I think you have a very light constitution, and maybe because I'm English and I have a rough constitution, we can hold anything. But when I went to Mexico a couple of times, not a thing happened to me in those hotels. But
oh, so you went to the hotel. In the hotel,
yeah.
you're fine. I'm talking about, I was working. I wasn't going to the hotel. Well, even in the hotel.
No, street food, bottled water all the time, all the time.
Yeah, it wasn't, I didn't go to a resort. I went to Mexico City. In the resort, they're a little bit better.
Yeah.
But yeah, and yes, my system is low, so, but other people get sick. You know, the Montezuma revenge? Yeah, it's not a good thing. And yes, ice is not bad if, like everything else, if it's used proper hygiene. When we do processing, we put ice as part of the HACCP plan. So you do the risk assessment. Okay, next slide. Bronte, she live in Mexico and nothing happened to her, to me but my cousin. Again, like I said, I probably am not the right person because my system is so clean, I get sick at the drop of a hat. My cousin got boils on her skin from the water, yeah. So I don't know what's in the Mexico water. They're working on it, but. So if you were going to do water usage testing, you're looking for E. coli in the water, and remember E. coli is feces, it's an indicator of the water. They don't have that in the Caribbean, but in the US and sometimes in England, they will shut down the beaches because of high levels of bacteria in the water. So if you are going to test for your water, your E. coli should be less than your E. coli count, 100 per 100 ml of water is good. It's not zero, it's just low levels. If you go into the 500, then you're in the danger zone. You have to wait a few days to harvest after you getting or spraying. And then if your water has over 500 per ml of water, you have to retest it. And if it's still high, then don't use it in that form or treat it. Okay, next slide. Keep going. So now we are coming close to time and we have like 7 minutes. I'll go through a few items for you. So on traceability, again, traceability is one of the key things about food safety. And I think we have a lot of work to do on traceability in the Caribbean, especially for our processing facilities. So if your food is coming from the farm, you're supposed to be able, if you're selling it, to trace it all the way back to the person that ate it. So if I buy an apple, right now, I'm supposed to be able to tell that where the apple came from and what tree it comes from. When I used to work for Kellogg, we buy a lot of strawberries for the cereal. So we would go to the farmers, we pick the farm, we know what rotation that the farm goes through. We look at the farmers. In the packing house, we have control and we have tracing numbers on there. That trace number goes all the way through the transportation, at the border crossing, the processing, distribution center. The reason why traceability is so important is if you have an issue and people are getting sick, the government, the consumers want to know where is the source of the contamination so they can get rid of it. I know we have a lot more work to do for us to even get close to this, but that doesn't mean we can't. So if you are selling food to the hotel, make sure that you know which farm you had it, what day you picked it, who packed it, where did you pack it, right? So you are protecting yourself. So if 5 people are selling to the hotels, you can come back and say, hey, I know my lettuce wasn't the one that made you sick, because here is all the information I have, all the documentation I have for that, right? So traceability is big, and in the developed countries, they are having a high-tech AI. So when you go into the supermarket, you can scan your food and it tells you, some of them will even tell you what's the name of the farmer that grows the food. So be aware of that. Next slide. And traceability is a big piece of the good agricultural practices. Recall. Recall is big in developed countries from food poisoning and from allergen. Allergen is the #1 cause of recall in the US. In other countries, foodborne illness for bacteria is way up there. Now, can anybody remember a recall in SKN in the last 5 years? Have you had a recall that you can think about in the last 5 years from SKN? Any recalls? I tried to search, I didn't see any. You guys know a recall is when they have to take all the food off the shelf.
It was lettuce.
It was lettuce, yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking, somebody said peanut butter. Peanut butter, yes, but I'm thinking locally. Something that happened locally to us. that we had to recall food because of contamination, either from foreign material, from microbial, or for chemical. Iceberg, I think, yes. So that's good. That's good. You guys could recall it because in most countries in the Caribbean and the other developed countries, we don't have recall because we don't have a way to trace the food back, and we don't know where to go when people get sick. First of all, we don't know when a lot of people get sick. Second, we don't have any way to trace it. And third, we don't have a way of taking it off the shelf. So somebody said there was a lettuce was romaine in SKN. And again, not surprising, if you learn anything, remember how I said you cannot clean lettuce once it's contaminated. So recall becomes another way of, and it's an after the fact, because it's too late. We want to do prevention. So GAP is about preventing. The recall is after the fact, but you have to recall it. And once you recall, it's really dangerous. I've had a couple of recalls, which I don't want to leave again to talk about. It is not fun. Okay, next slide. And so this is where I'm going to end for now before we do. We'll talk a little bit in the last minute we have. We won't have enough time to do it, but in God we trust. Everybody has your paper. Remember, document everything you do, whether it's on a notebook, on a file, in a computer for your farm, make sure you document it. And a place you can start doing that is on your food safety plan. And I know we don't have a lot of time to go through it because I want to give you the benefit of staying on time. However, if there's anybody who wants to stay, I'm more than willing to stay if Latoya will give me that opportunity for another 10, 15 minutes if you have questions on your plan. So on your farm food safety plan, what I've given you is a document that you can use for your very own purposes. It gives you a place to add. If you have it now, you can look at it. It allows you to add the name of your farm. It does your GAP plans for you. It tells you what examples of where to do your risk assessment. If you have not taken a look at it, I would like for you to take that, and next time we meet on Thursday, I'll spend 10 minutes to go through what you have if you have any questions. If you have a backyard garden or a small garden, then it's not as relevant, but it's still some things you can read. If you have a farm where you're selling food to other people in the hotels or any place else, I would highly recommend that you use that or something else. It protects you, it protects the consumers, and it's a real great tool that you can use to create more sale, more market access. Now, it's exactly 8 o'clock, and again, I believe in finishing on time, but I will take that time to have any question. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, so that's it. The food safety plan, I said. Does anybody have any questions on the food safety plan? Did anybody get a chance to look at it? Do you have any questions that you would like to ask me? I can do that now, or you can send it in the chat and I will answer and have more discussion on it on Thursday. I'll spend some 10 minutes on it for Thursday. Okay. So to recap, today we did good agricultural practices, and it's a combination of the food safety items that we learned for the kitchen and for the home, and how we translate it into the farm, and how we make sure that as primary producers, either for ourselves or for our consumers, that we are making safe, healthy food, especially on produce, because you cannot clean it enough once it's contaminated. And the idea is to focus on prevention We have to be careful with the soil amendments that we use. We have to be careful about the water source that we use. We have to be careful about how we grow, where we grow our food. Keep animals out of the fields, right? We need to be able to clean and sanitize our equipment, provide training for our employees. How we package and label the food for allergens or microbial contamination is key. And where possible, be able to trace your food from the time you grow it to harvesting it. So if you have an issue, you can go back and pinpoint it. Or you can also use it to say, see, that wasn't me. I can show you my food that I provided you was not unsafe. Yes? So I'm gonna put my face back for you to see me again. Huh? So with that, that's the end of the session. I know I went a little longer than I expected and I didn't develop a question in time, but if you have any questions, any burning question, anything that surprised you, anything you disagree with, we can spend a few minutes to go through it. Anybody? Okay, if we're done with that, if we can, I'm not asking anybody to pick and summarize. I'm not gonna pick anybody, but I'm going to ask for 2 volunteers on Thursday to do a recap for me. Okay, Sheridan, you are welcome, and it's been my pleasure. I hope that you guys got some nuggets from this that you can apply to your farm, whether you at home, agro-processing. I'll do a little bit tomorrow on HACCP and agro-processing, and we'll talk about certification and we'll talk about organic farming. So ladies, have a good night. Sheridan will help with the summary. Thank you, Sheridan.